Okay, this is part 13, the Synagogue of Satan, Footprints in History, and I'll just continue with the further rise of Islam and the takeover of Spain, and also the rise of the Frankish kingdom and the further rise of the papacy. So the Moors consolidated their power in Spain. Their capital was at Cordova, which had a high population of Jews. There were also Jews in very important administrative positions in Toledo and Granada. Jewish trade flourished under Muslim Spain. The Moors became known also as Saracens in Spain and Gaul, and they finally attempted to take over Gaul also, but they were stopped by Charles Martel at the Battle of Tours or Poitiers in 732 AD. So the Moors were mostly kept in Spain, although they did keep the city of Narbonne in southern Gaul in the region called Septimania. Narbonne had a high population of Jews also and was defended by both Moors and Jews. Just a few quick notes about the name of Charles Martel. Charles gave his name to the Carolingian dynasty, and the name Martel meant hammer, and if you remember, the name Maccabee also meant hammer, so there may be a connection between at least some of the Franks to the Maccabees, the Hasmonean dynasty, which may have been descended from the tribe of Benjamin. This may explain why the kings of France later made claims on Jerusalem. This may have been through the tribe of Benjamin, which in Israel had claims to the land where Jerusalem was located. So if you see the Muslim revolution as just another form of the revolutionary spirit of Babylon with the purpose of more control, there was always a chance that the revolution could get out of control and the papacy would then have to contain the Islamic conquests. So Charles Martel might have been the perfect person for the papacy in holding back the Muslims in Gaul. But it appears that the papacy or whatever power was behind the revolution had a plan B, because just at about this time there was a revolt among the Muslims, and the Abbasids actually overthrew the Umayyads, and they took over rulership of most of the Islamic world by 750 AD, and they moved the capital from Damascus to Baghdad, which was founded in 762 AD. So it's interesting how it always seems to come back to Babylon. The city of Baghdad is very close to the ruins of the old city of Babylon. The Abbasids curiously had a philosophy much like Stoicism, which I've said before can also be traced to Babylon. The Abbasids didn't believe in national identity or national borders. They held religion to be much more important, and they just focused on converting anyone to Islam, and it didn't matter where they came from, and it didn't matter if they upheld any kind of national borders. This was a problem for the Arabs that actually first fought for Muhammad. Their national identity would no longer be held important, and they wanted to actually keep their identity by sticking to their own culture. After Charles Martel died, his son Pepin the Short, or Pepin the Third, tried to take over the kingdom of the Franks from the Merovingians, and he would make an alliance with the Pope. Pepin had offered to protect the papacy from the Lombards. They had taken over most of northern Italy, and they were threatening to take over the city of Ravenna, which was the last stronghold of Byzantium in northern Italy. Byzantium had colonized Venice for several centuries, but they were losing their hold. The Venetians were breaking ties with Byzantium and gaining more and more independence. Pepin the Short also made a deal with the Jews to take back the city of Narbonne in southern Gaul from the Moors. He promised the Jews that he would give them a king from the royal seed line of David if the Jews would hand over the city and recognize Pepin as the king of the Franks. So he actually held to his promise and did give them a king. This king is known as Aymery, or also Theory or Theodoric, and the name Aymery might actually be a corruption of the Muslim name Makir. And it turns out that this Aymery was recognized by both Pepin and also the Pope and the rulers of Baghdad as legitimately from the seed line of David. And it's believed that Pepin brought this king from the Merovingian bloodline. He was a descendant of the assassinated King Dagobert II. It's said that the Jews of Narbonne held to their bargain and murdered the Moors of the city and opened the city gates to the Franks. So it appears that the Merovingians did have verifiable proof that they were of the bloodline of the ruling house of David. But the Merovingians had a strange account of their origin. They had a myth that their founding king Meravius or Merovec had two fathers instead of one. One was said to be a normal human being, but the other was said to be some kind of hairy sea beast. This may have been just an allegory that the Merovingians had two bloodlines. One would be from the house of David, but the other was possibly a Babylonian bloodline from Nimrod or even back to Cain. The Babylonians had a similar myth that their first king was some kind of man-fish, and this also might have gotten into the Kabbalah and influenced the Jews. They might have believed that their Messiah had to be both from the house of David, but also possibly from some Babylonian bloodline, like the bloodline of Nimrod or Cain also. Some are of the opinion that this Merovingian allegory was just a hidden reference to their Rex Deus origins and their connection to the rulership of Israel, and they claim that this is why the papacy began to abandon the Merovingian rulers. It appears that the papacy sanctioned Merovingian rulers when they baptized Clovis several centuries before, but it appears that the papacy broke its pact with the Merovingian rulers when they formally recognized Pepin the Short as king of the Franks in 751 AD. You might think it's a good thing that the papacy rejected the Merovingian rulers, but the Pope only recognized Pepin the Short as king of the Franks. The papacy may have had plans for Merovingian rulership later over the entire empire and possibly the entire world. It's also interesting that the papacy recognized Pepin right at the same time that the Abbasids took over Islamic rulership. Pepin the Short died in 768 AD, and his two sons, Charles and Charlemagne, became king in his place. Charlemagne died in 771 AD, so Charles became the sole king of the Franks, and he became known later as Charlemagne. Even though the Merovingians had been pushed out of rulership, they were still considered important. One of Charlemagne's wives was a Merovingian princess, and his father Pepin had married a Merovingian, and also Pepin's sister married a Merovingian. The Merovingian bloodline would continue in many of the ruling houses of Europe. Charlemagne consolidated his rule over the Frankish kingdom, and he also subdued the Lombards and took over northern Italy. He expanded the Frankish kingdom into Germany, where he had several wars with the Saxons. There are claims that he used very brutal methods to convert the Saxons to Christianity, and this created a lot of hatred between the pagans and the Christians. There are claims that the pagans of Germany and their cousins in Scandinavia wanted revenge for the forced conversions to Christianity and also for the cutting down of their sacred oaks by Christians. So it's claimed that for this reason the Vikings attacked Christian kingdoms. But I wonder if this was the real reason. I suspect it was the papacy that was behind the Viking raids. It's hard to believe, but I can see how the papacy was still trying to bring the Celtic Church under its domination, and they could hire the pagan Vikings to attack lands that were under the domination of the Celtic Church. The first recorded Viking raid was on Lindisfarne in Britain in 793 AD. Lindisfarne was on land that had been under the domination of the Celtic Church, and most of the early Viking raids were on monasteries that had been part of the Celtic Church, mostly in Ireland. As they acquired more wealth, the Vikings would then go on to raid for other reasons, building up power and kingdoms. But you just wonder if they were working with someone else, like the papacy or some other seafaring people that were guiding them. How did the Vikings even know exactly where to go on their raids? In 800 AD, the Holy Roman Empire was founded. Charlemagne was crowned emperor by Pope Leo III. By this time, the Pope was claiming to be the vicar of Christ, or someone standing in the place of Christ, having all authority to crown any king or emperor, regardless of bloodline or standing. The papacy based this claim on a document known as the Donation of Constantine, which had appeared at just about this time. It supposedly gave the papacy the authority to act in the place of Christ by Constantine, the emperor that had supposedly founded Christianity in the Roman Empire centuries before. Most scholars now think that the document was a fake or a forgery, and it just seems a bit ridiculous. Why would the authority need to be given by Constantine and not by Christ himself? In any case, most rulers didn't have much respect for the papacy's authority. It's said that Charlemagne was actually surprised by his coronation as Holy Roman Emperor, and he might have refused it if he had known. So what really appears is just the revolutionary spirit again. The people rebel against their rulers. They think they can choose their rulers. The rulers think that they can choose themselves. They overstep their powers. and we just have a continuing struggle between the people, the Pope, or the King, or the Emperor. Charlemagne died in 814 AD, and the Holy Roman Empire was divided up into three rival factions. In the east, Byzantium was gaining strength, and it was continuing to defy the authority of the papacy. In the Islamic world, the Shiite faction of the Fatimids was growing in strength. They were named after the daughter of Muhammad, Fatima, and they were taking more and more lands in North Africa and the Middle East, and also taking over islands in the Mediterranean Sea. It's interesting that the struggle between Byzantium and the Islamic Fatimids appeared just like the old struggle between the Greek Seleucid Empire and the Greek Ptolemaic Empire centuries before, and it may be that the rulers of both those powers were actually descended from the rulers of those old Greek empires. So I'll continue in the next part with the resurgence of Byzantium and the further rise of the Islamic powers, and also with the rise of the Holy Roman Empire. So until next time.